Sí, capaz que tiene que no sé, ahorita, pero que esto es mi dije, me la que y no pasa nada. Estamos en cambio, tampoco me sería como que era un ambiente igual levantamos de Javier. Porque no cabía nada.
Of course, I might accidentally take it home, but that's just the risk we take in life. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Hello. My name is Shady, and I let the music on. My name is Shady, and I am the events manager here at Lost City Books. So thank you all for coming. I know it's a Friday, and we're a great crowd. Awesome. A few things before we begin. If you've never been here before, I'll tell you a little bit about Lost City Books. As you might have seen already on our shelves, we are a used, new, and rare bookstore. So if you take a look around, you'll notice that our shelves are really tightly packed with carefully selected books about the various subjects that we all really care about. Some of them are used, some of them are rare, that we dug out of some estate sale somewhere, or maybe the trash. And some of them are new, and we chose to have them in a store because we felt like they were important or moving or relevant to the people who come here. So that's you guys. Thank you for being here. And that's you, Imogen. So thank you for being here. A few housekeeping things. Please turn off your cell phones. Those things are really loud and annoying in the middle of the talk. And we want to give Imogen our utmost respect and attention. Secondly, if you purchased your book online but haven't received it yet, come and see me before you take a copy, just so I can fiddle with the back end there. On the subject of books, we're almost out, actually. A lot of people bought them today, so unfortunately, we don't have enough for everybody in the audience right now. Hopefully, some of you already have a copy. But if we don't have enough copies for you, we'll make sure to get you a copy as soon as we can. Nextly, as you can see, this cyborg setup here indicates that we are live streaming on both YouTube and Instagram. And while none of you are visible, if you choose to ask a question or offer a comment, that question or comment will be a part of the live stream. On the subject of questions and comments, please hold your questions and comments to the end of our discussion and reading. We will have plenty of time to do that then. But we're going to focus on the topic first and then get into the nitty gritty, unless you feel like just tossing it out to the audience sometimes. That's up to you. And that's about it. So without anything further, I'd like to introduce our poet of the evening, poet du noir. French, everybody. Tough crowd. I'm pretty funny right now.
What does that mean?
Poet of the night. Imogen Christian Smith is a poet and performer living and working in, I can't pronounce this, Lenapehoking / Brooklyn, New York. Thank you. Their work has appeared in Folder, Tagwerk, Blush, The Rumpus, Peach Mag, The Poetry Project newsletter, and We Want It All, Anthology of Radical Trans Poetics, and elsewhere. Imogen received an MFA at NYU and was a 2021-22 Emerge Surface B Fellow at the Poetry Project at St. Mark's Church. Stemmy Things is their first book. Please welcome Imogen Smith.
Hi, everyone. This is actually the first reading that I've done outside New York City, where I live, and it's amazing to be here. I had no expectations, so it's really nice to see.
things. So, taking a recovery, very evocative imaging about the book as a whole, of it as an object.
Well, I think that making a first book, something interesting about, maybe it's not interesting, maybe it's frustrating and difficult about making a first book is that it feels sort of necessary, like, whereas in the since this book has been completed, but in pre-production, I guess. It's also weird releasing a book because it's been for like 2 years by the time it's out. So I feel kind of tension with it, maybe. But to the point. So catch-all, and I think something that I grappled with while sort of like forming it and structuring it was the kind of trope of trans memoir, and that this is sort of historically the way that trans people have been allowed any kind of space in literature to talk about their lives. And that's obnoxious and unfortunate, and a form of limiting a lot of creativity. So I'm like a garden goth. I like to think of myself as that. And there's a lot of plants in this book, and there's kind of like heavy usage of this metaphor of ecology. And I'm sort of thinking about my own background and a greater background of gentrification and colonization in this country, in the world, and forming, and also thinking about a lot of like queer and trans artists and forming kinds of ecologies, sort of placing myself in ecosystems around those things.
Thank you. Something you said, well, two things. Something you said, it reminds me of when you're talking about the book's been done for 2 years. It kind of reminds me of if you're cooking a really big, elaborate meal and you spend like a couple of hours cooking, and by the end it's finished. I'm sure it's delicious, but I'm just like not hungry anymore. I don't want to eat it. Does it kind of remind you of that a little bit, or is it just like you're so inundated with the flavors and the herbs of this book that does it feel like a little strange from you?
It feels, yeah, it's definitely like that. It's definitely the I've been cooking and now I'm not hungry moment. A way that I've kind of avoided that, it's like it's sort of excessively long for a book of poems. I really wanted it to be a sprawling mess, and it is. Sorry, I'm like putting my thoughts together. I don't mind an awkward silence, as you maybe can already tell. There's a lot of poems. There's like some poems in it that I was just like, yeah, these, like, I know that these are good to read to an audience, and like I know that I can get a certain kind of, there's like the poems that are bangers, but then there's like the weirder, like more long form, or like things I have never read out loud before. So now when I've done readings, I've tried to read mostly new work, but I feel like I have to hawk the thing. I read those pieces that like don't sort of lend themselves to performance, and that has kind of kept it a little bit.
Going back to the talk about the garden goth moment. I love that And something that's been interesting to me that I feel I've observed, I'm not, a cultural scientist or anything, but I noticed that a lot of like queer folks in the past couple of years have become plant people. I'm a huge plant person. I have 44 plants in my house. And the emerging sort of pathos about it seems to be one of nurturance, like self-nurturance, but also sort of building life and like infusing your home space or your outdoor space with life. And I wonder if there's some of that in this collection, but also in kind of just your general about plant life and how it relates to identity and place and art and all of those things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that exactly what you're saying about having to sort of like listen to something and give it care, and something that is speaking a different kind of language than you are, I think that is incredibly useful for everyone to do. But I think also particularly if you've maybe had a kind of estranged relationship with your body, that the presence that sort of, you know, especially some kinds of more like particular, I don't know what the word I'm trying to use. I don't want to call it plant obstinate because, but
they can be obstinate sometimes.
yeah. Or it's just like it's apparent that you can't communicate in the usual way. And I think plants respond like so well to like sound and touching, and like that's been something hard for like it's been hard for me to accept my body at various times in my life. So like I don't know. Yeah, having the opportunity to love other things and nurture them is wonderful and grounding.
I can understand that. It feels kind of like, this thing, some plants are obstinate, I would say. If you're having similar feelings of obstinacy about your own body or like disconnect and inability to communicate. So learning to do so with something that isn't you, right, can offer a lot of, like you said, the grounding, the mindfulness. So thank you for sharing that insight. Would you say that the poems in this collection are kind of related to the same subject? Would you say that, well, I don't want to, do you think they're all about a similar or the same subject, or would you say they're pretty diversified?
I think they're kind of approaching the same subject through numerous angles, I think. The first section of the book is the first section of the book is called Ecologies, and it itself is very much about, it sort of opens on this garden goth sort of moment, this kind of like the opening part of the book is trying to establish roots that the rest of the book kind of grows out of. And so in that first section, there are poems about plant life. There's also poems about, it's a lot about family, and that kind of becomes a bigger conversation about suburbia and Southern Appalachia, where I lived for a lot of my life. And ideas of inhabiting space, I guess, related to ecology that that can then be applied to where one finds themselves later in life, like in a city, like how did I get here, and who does the city belong to, and what are the stakes in that?
I think it's really interesting set of ideas to explore when you talk about body, talk about family, talk about roots, and then also talk about sort of the historical and cultural relationship with place. And as you're talking, like you mentioned earlier, talking about like indigenous land and how, even though most of us here were not the first people, of the lands that we inhabit, our bodies are still built by this space and act on. Living in New York especially, how you're able to interact with the natural space in such a, I mean, it's a city, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like, how does that find its way into your life and thus find its way into your work?
I think in New York, you're always kind of, you have to sort of carve out little bits of space for yourself that might be sort of smaller than this little corner nook over here. Or sort of like, I'm always, sounds ridiculous or cheesy, but I'm always taken by like plants that are growing up out of the sidewalk. Things that are like very resilient, much like many of the people who live there. And yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. Made a Tupac bit about the flower growing up in the cracks in the sidewalk. So I want to dig a little more into who you are, who these poems are. Sure, I like that actually. We're going to keep that who the poems are too. But I know that you are going to read a few for us tonight. So if you'd like to move into that moment.
Okay. Let me can we go back? Can we put a pin in the reading part? To say more about like living in New York or living in any city or being a person that lives on this continent specifically. It's such a complex situation because where I grew up and where I come from, like I would not be able to live outwardly the life that I live with. It wouldn't be possible, and it would be like very unsafe. And so people like me will move to cities to like find this place to be able to live our lives, right? But in doing that, we make it harder for other people to live their lives too. So it's that presents this very complex ecology that I think the book is grappling with a lot. Is like, what does it mean to like love a place and love being in it and love a community in that place, while also reckoning and it giving you life and making your life possible, while also reckoning with the inherent or the latent damage that your presence in that place causes. And poems for me are ways of asking questions, and I have no answers to that, only the complexity. And I think hopefully the poems are little sketches of confusion.
Thank you. I like the idea of the poem asking a question, whether or not there is a presence of an answer, right? Because the question itself has so much importance into that's what I call reflection, reflecting these questions, which informs the thing that you do next, regardless of whether or not you feel you've reached an answer. And all of us here in Washington, D.C. are especially maybe acutely aware of what it means to live in this particular nation, especially this last couple of years, but the entire history, and what it means to be a part of the historic displacement of an entire country's worth of people, at the same time as the continued displacement of people over and over again that happens through, for example, gentrification of the city. And any DC natives up in here might know. Okay. It's me. Well, that's kind of my point. It's there are fewer and fewer of us in the city. Anyway, I'm riffing there a little bit.
Rip away.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how that drive towards, like we said earlier, nurturance and mindfulness, embodiment, community, family, and all of the root spread, to use your phrase, from that also is can be good in that it nurtures all of us and brings us all together, but also can be inherently an act of violence that we involuntarily participate in because it is uprooting roots that are already there, you know? So I wonder if maybe some of these pieces also explore that idea too, the, like you said, the damage that we cause. I'm so slow at this.
Reading. So embarrassing. Yeah, I think that they meander around that. I don't know what the solution, I don't know any kind of solution for it. It seems like what kind of conditions would have to exist for that disruption to not happen, and how in lieu of like those contexts not existing at the, or not totally existing at the moment. Time's up. You know, how do we move with how do we move through the world with care and openness, and also be very aware that like we're like literally covered in history. You know?
Thank you. No, just like.
Okay.
Let's and we'll have time to. I want to dig a little deeper too, but I want to hear the works, you know, from your very own lips. It sounded weird. Thank you. And we can kind of dig a little deeper into that voice that emerges in the songs.
Last night I was packing, and I may have gotten really stoned while doing that. In fact, I definitely did. That was absolutely the context. And I had like gotten in bed. It was like 2 a.m. and it was like, oh, I forgot something. And it was like all the poems, like, yeah. It's like, oh, should probably bring some things to read. Let's see. I'm gonna read the second poem in the book, which is kind of the first poem, because the first poem is called a poem, which is a term I learned that means this. It means the poem that comes before the proper rest of the poems. It's like the introduction, but not. Anyway, it's not important. This is called Deep Ecology. Also, I'm usually like standing when I read because I like to gesticulate really wildly, so might get confused. Gardens are for growing stemmy things bending toward sun. We living sink heirloom in tidy rows, set away days to brush clean the stone, lay leaves that unfurl slow. Nothing is ever finished. We are naked, relentless, and now hard, now molten presence. Some call this horror, others beauty. Elemental, I say, pieced together of skies generous weeping. It's fair to wonder how Earth holds our wreckage, why we aren't swallowed in the belly, though some questions answer themselves. You cannot swap a set of bones, nor come from any other ruin man. We gather days, dust, brick, bacteria, mortar, form. Consequence gives the body shape, says you cannot build home in a lie. I am not a woman. My gender is feminine. Even the moon travels farther for what it wants. Mostly I am water, swollen, mourning. Tie a blue ribbon around my finger and forget me. Do you think me monstrous, wanting my body my way? My poem is a dream saying, teach me where you're brittle and maybe we can rest there. Her breath tethers limbs to toes, wraps blue knit, where nothing alone is useful. Deep in the quiet, I touch myself undone. Stars, still stars over turns and brambles. A dark wood weaving beyond city light. You love the mess, don't you? The way consequence gives and gives, stony dismay, a sweetness of rest. Here's a poem for my body, stemmy thing. It begins and ends in dirt.
I see so clearly the emerging theme of I'm gonna keep calling it the garden goth emotions. This poem is dark, but also um, moody, and it speaks of the body a bit, but it more speaks of that ephemeral thing that is not the body, but is the body at the same time.
Yes.
And can you maybe speak a little bit on that?
Yes, and I think I could have maybe more succinctly answered earlier questions if I had thought of this, but it's just the tank what was that line? The dark wood weaving beyond city light. I'm really kind of obsessed. Something that I'm obsessed metaphorically about plants is like tangles and sort of like a messy nonlinear kind of overlapping interjoining of life and elements and material. Wait. Can you rephrase so I can bring it back? Help me bring it back.
Sure. Yeah, just talking about I think the phrase I used was the ephemeral thing that is the body and is not the body.
Right. So all that matter that is entangled is I think that ephemeral thing, where the body is made out of whatever is held in the space between all of that stuff.
Absolutely. And when we think about what animates us still being essentially a mystery, what is life even? You are your body, but you're not your body. You live in your body, but you also own your body or whatever, not to get capitalist about it. But at the same time, the internalities that we hold are infinite, and the body is finite. However, when the body stops, so does the self. So where's that in between space, right?
Right. And in terms of lineages / ecologies, which is kind of a word I use, I think, interchangeably in the book, like maybe that is where selves continue to communicate with each other. I guess poetry is kind of just like a long tradition of
Plants in that way, they have their, what is it? I can't remember now, but there's so many fun plant facts about the different lineages of different plants and how they came to be. How I don't know what I'm just making this up. This is not fact. Like all the monsteras in North America came from one root or something like that. But it also is, plant life leaves its indelible mark on everything around it, whether it's the presence of those plants, like you said, bursting out of the concrete in small little places, or the absence of the plant life and the absence of the natural world, and how that, for us as humans, it has that impact on us spiritually, emotionally, but also bodily. Not having trees in your city is bad for you.
Yeah.
People become sicker when they're not around. Similarly, like access to fresh produce and things like that. I'm rambling now, but that's just kind of what that made me think about.
Can I read? There's wait, what do you even call these? The quotes from other authors that open.
The person's actually don't know.
Anyone. Epigraph. Okay. What did someone else say? Did everyone say epigraph?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, the epigraph from this section is something that, like, I don't know, this is one of the most like perfect things I've ever read, and it really sort of made available a lot of new ways more complete. I don't want to use these sort of like capitalist closed circle words either. But this Zora Neale Hurston epigraph, like the dead seeming cold rocks, I have memories that came out of the material that went to make time and place have had their say. And yeah, I just read that and I was like, yeah. I mean, you could spend your whole life grappling with that. Those two sentences.
I think we might have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you select another?
Sure. So this book has all kinds of poems in it. It's got like sort of like quasi psychedelic garden goth poems. It's got a lot of slate gay poems in it that are like really almost like dire aspirational diary entries, you know, me like how do I like frame desire for myself, you know? And then there's like funny stuff, there's not funny stuff, you know, what do people want to hear? Big poems. Thank you, Brave Soul. Okay, this is like a really humiliating poem. It's like one of those poems that you like write. Right. It's like I wrote this a long time ago. And when I wrote it, I was like, rad. And now when I read it, I'm like, okay.
Become very close.
I mean, yeah. Really, it's just like I was obsessed with the first season of Euphoria. And, it's just like on so many levels. I was just like, yeah. Second season, ooh, I don't know. Not as much. Sorry, we can talk afterwards. Anyway, this is called Like Any Woman's Penis. Which was mostly a fun thing to just title a poem and then like read it to people. And people are like, or maybe they're like, yeah, you know, depends on who you're reading to. Like any woman's penis, mine drops down where thigh slaps thigh, getting sticky with summer. That warm, salty wave welling up, up, up. In this way, I differ from some women, but not all. I might rather agree. Right beneath moonlight through park, no branches but shadows of branch. Pesky stingers may be cruising in the thickets. Virgo season hard lean and glitter smeared cheeks, riding no hands like Hunter Schafer. There's a girlhood I need to give myself. Late 30s, licking wounds, done counting bruises my body holds. Anyway, that's fewer than belly laughs notched with J, smearing lip stain at Sephora like we fear no germ. Or that slim bit of power I get hollering, fuck off, I'm my own girl. Greater than the possibility of breakage is the dream of a whole fist, or at least 3 fingers, or a stately purple strap-on loving the shit out of my earthy ass. When T said, leave the chain, take off all the rest, and came down on my wrists like Sappho on the rocks. How extra, what a miracle. I dream in Fenty, a friend's HBO, mostly rigid silicone and late 80s, mid 90s smut. My nightstand painted pink with aloe and gems, moonstone, rose quartz, star cluster, garnet, calcite, orange, blue, pinwheely sex toy like some medieval Joan of Arc shit, and a dog-eared copy of the new Fuck You, which is available downstairs in a really great book that you can read. Sometimes I feel like a caricature, and in this way I'm like so many women we know. Like any girl's penis, mine's average because I'm average and usually people who don't shave their pits. I'm a woman who doesn't shave their pits but does shave their legs because I live to laugh at my own sweet secrets. That was a really small one, but there's a little bit of smut. They get smuttier.
I love it. I love the smut. There was so much rhythm and cadence in that one. I mean, I think we all kind of felt it. I started rocking a little bit. And I wonder if that eroticism, you know, is, of course, eros as art, you know, but at the same time, we were talking a little bit earlier about just like that ephemeral body now body thing, and this poem is causing me to rock back and forth, and I'm sure everybody's getting a little bit horny. Just me? No? Okay. So I want to kind of hear a little bit about maybe is the use of that rhythmic feeling intentional? Is it meant to feel like a pulse, like something?
It's definitely intentional. When I write, I edit out loud, and I also, not so much with things that I'm working on now, although still sort of. I write with performance in mind, and because I love a stage, and I love reading poems to people, and I think that no one wants to hear, if you're going to ask people to watch you do something, I feel like you kind of these words, and I'm thinking about you sort of owe a performance, and so finding a rhythm while writing, kind of like gets me going, gets me like, also gets the words flowing, and then they kind of take on a life of their own. I also was once a musician, and I don't really play music anymore, but I have felt in the time that's passed since then that some sort of rhythmic sensibilities just kind of shifted how they manifest through me.
It's interesting what you said just now about the performance aspect, because I feel like in this poem particularly, it's very much about not performing. It's about just like good old meaty, sweaty, sexy realness, but at the same time, it's the presentation that you as the poet are putting into the work. And I'm curious if there is some sort of dichotomy between the performance, the act of performing the work, and also the performance that maybe is the work. And do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think moving through the world is often scary and really hard, and super stressful, and so many of us have to kind of, in very different ways, code switch all the time and figure out how we're going to get through a situation without someone else feeling offended and therefore afraid of you, or whatever it is. And so there's something aspirational just about that too. Like in a poem, I can be I can just be kind of unfettered in a way that maybe I can't always in the world.
This might seem like a bit of a left turn, but that also reminds me of when we were talking about lineages earlier, and how it's very human to engage with whatever you might want to describe as the lineages that we were talking about, right? But especially as queer and trans folks, those lineages are, yes, thank you. Those lineages are more built than inherited, if that makes sense. So I'm curious about, I keep saying that phrase and I'm going to think about it too much. I'd like to know more about what you think about that, and how maybe how prominent of a theme those built lineages are in the work as well.
Could you say a little bit more about the builds?
Right. So, for example, a lot of us have chosen family over blood family, and so on and so forth. Our communities are often the center of our lives, and I don't mean to generalize here. Plenty of queer people have blood family too. Some of us even talk to their ours. Sorry, Dad. But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a really fraught thing as well. I think of like especially trans figures like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, like that become at this point kind of like these mothers of this idea of movement and larger community. Um and it's absolutely right to sort of like revere and have love for and keep the memory of these people alive. Also, the material conditions of like my life and Marsha's life are absolutely essential to understanding, trying to be in the world with any with intention, you know. And so the structures, I feel like we need to like push against the idea of what those of the of this a sort of like neat idea of what those structures are, because those kind of lineages are materially real, but they're also so materially broad.
And I think what you're saying can really be evidenced in just how challenging it is to create and maintain queer space that is truly inclusive and that's truly informed, not just by history, but also, you know, for example, trauma informed and informed about the needs of different people from different parts of the community. And when just going back to the thought earlier about the nurturance of the garden and all that, and these systems spread, you know, some soil is more fertile than others. It's just interesting to see the deep and true importance of those legacies and how they affect all of us, everybody in this room. Even straight people sometimes get some blowback from that, but and at the same time to watch us in modernity struggle to either follow in footsteps or to continue the work, you know.
Right, and to also deal with who people actually are versus an image of them.
That exactly. That's there we go. Thank you. Would you like to read one more?
Yeah, I'm gonna read the last poem, which it kind of really ends on a real downer. Some of it, but this is also, I think, the most musical one. There's also a lot of poems about music because other lineages. There's like I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, is where I was born and raised, and in the 90s, my first CD ever was like an REM album. So this was like the first kind of, without even knowing it, the first like kind of queer voice that I ever heard was Michael Stipe. So there's a poem about Michael Stipe, and there's poems about Kurt Cobain, and you know, as I say in the poem, it's rude to speculate about people's genders, but like, you know, Kurt's an interesting character. There's some poems about Sophie, electronic musician, you know, those kinds of ecologies as well. And this poem mentions people like well, you'll hear it. It's called Wound Vision. And this is another thing I do at poetry readings. I'll like be like, oh wait, there's a story to this that I need to tell. Usually that happens in the middle of the poems. But this poem is kind of inspired. I live near a park in Brooklyn called Prospect Park, kind of near it. And in that kind of moments where the vaccines had just come out, like within a month of that, this very, which in retrospect is a very strange liminal moment where people like coming back together and not knowing how to do it. But there were these kind of late night secret dance party rave things in the park in this kind of old historic cruising area. And of collectivity that then dissipates. But a funny story that is talked about in the poem is like, I remember being and sorry if anyone's offended by that word. And there being a like a group of like very like business person gays, you know, gay boys, you know, and the two do not like overlap at all. And we were in circle dancing, they were in a circle dancing, and then like one of them comes over with some poppers, and it's like I want some poppers, and we were like, yeah. And then we all like these two groups of people like together were like passing it around, we're like, yeah, you know, and that was a lovely moment. The boss bitch is not my sister, not the nation, and she ain't my mother. I say I'm a traveler, not a conqueror, nor am I passive either. There are bodies yearning inside me, and we vibe. At the secret rave in Prospect Dark, the dancing's erratic, post so much sick. We take poppers off preppy gays who in before times sneered at my wholly repurposed cock. Imagine utopia, disability informed. I like to come off loose and unsettled as if counter narratives negate all complicit. Doesn't everyone want these drugs, these kinks, these particular beats and wood? A vision is just that, whoever is in yours and y'all talk. I fuck myself often as body allows, deep as I can and a little plus. The erotic's a channel to what I know I don't yet know. Shy inside, bend me over, help me understand anything. If utopia is ecological, speech acts sewn and spun, what'll we squeeze from the gut rot of capital? You see, a wound is just that. It's a vision, a Ziploc full of mangoes from a woman in the tunnel. Subway and she elder, the total ecstasy of fruit and summer, the pleasures of juice stick fingers to tongue. A poem says, look up, look sideways, see the web laid fierce. Yes, I'm naive, and a poem is anything. Try quiet or talk all the time, who cares? Herbert von King in COVID summer, babes at a distance, squat in the bush, weed splayed ballpark, all a league of their own. It's small things get you over. Take Holy Mother Sylvia's big plush bear or every picture of pups in Arca. Take Beverly Glen Copeland any morning, donning my paint splattered Malcolm X bets. I wear lockets and smocks and denim on wool, tie-dye with rhinestone or hoops. Crushes, sweet crushes, erotics of snuggles scribbled in spiral, all caps like Juliana Huxtable. Sometimes pop songs jet me out of time, but mostly reify it. Oh, nostalgia, dreary of cards, here is the life I've lived. Cup, coin, staff, sword, the dog doesn't fall, it's the fool. A wound, friend, is just that. In the city, I hear everything. Why? I lift what's mine to hold. Out in the street, an eye joins we and we march. Shout, crouch, and lock arms. You, and you. Intifada, intifada, clap, clap, clap. Caps again like June Jordan. The voice in my throat goes gravel, set to gut by blood-bound ancestors traipsing where they should not go. Me? I'm pavement. Step, step, step over stolen ground. Hello. I don't think the world lets people be good, and so we do what we do. We do it here in the world. Thanks. Also, hello, everyone. Happy to listen.
That's a hell of an ending poem, I gotta tell you. I feel like it captures so thoroughly that moment that you were describing. Not just because specifically of COVID, but that moment of just kind of wild, like you said, the collectivity of it all. The the many particular just ways of being that can be all collected in an individual, an individual who's not an individual, you know, you're an individual and fully part of the rest. So I felt that, you know, in this piece.
I think a big part of the book is like I'm really curious about how and if and under what circumstances of time and materiality an I can turn into a we.
And I think, I'm sure many of us here can attest to having experienced that directly this past couple of years, especially in our many small communities, right? Where that I guess the barrier to entry to that we space was so much thinner, especially in like 2020, early 2021, where everyone was truly, not everyone, I would like to think everyone here at least is truly concerned and interested in the other and the people near them. But we saw, for example, so many mutual aid organizations pop up, and some of them are still ongoing. And it begs the question: is it suffering and danger that drive us to that collectivity? Is it like the existential threat on our own safety that makes us feel vulnerable enough to finally reach out in that way? I don't have the answer to that question, but it kind of seems like it.
Unfortunately, I mean, I think definitely like we white people are especially guilty of that, or like have that like it's like it takes something instead of a willingness to just see. That's a like gross oversimplification.
I see what you mean, though. I think, as I'm sure you've already thought of, but it definitely attests to the power of capitalism infusing itself into everything that we do. So that we inevitably become transactional. And specifically talking about Western society, United States, and parts of Europe. And it's also fascinating how many different cultures of origin were not like that until they were colonized by capitalism and by white society and all of that. And also going back to sort of the painting of that poem that you just read, so many of us are still trying to rebuild or build anew our entirely new cultures that divest from that, or there's that capitalist language, divest, that unlearn that, and that kind of flush it out of our cultural memory in a way. I have hope, in us just by asking these questions and thinking about this and dreaming about that as a possibility.
I do as well, and that's why, and I think like also to sound kind of precious, but like this is the power of art, is like to maybe pose questions in a way that is dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. The power of art. We can't do anything without first imagining it, right? And art is that imagination that builds that out for us.
Which, to go back to this ecology word, is like why this is so important in this book. Is like that imagining is a web, like every book is an ecology, every painting, every whatever it is, every song.
Thank you. So we have time now. Speaking of reaching out and becoming a we, do we have any questions for our comments?
As a young poet that also lives in Brooklyn, as a last, what are some places you recommend? I'm very new out there.
Let's see. I think most small bookstores kind of host events, at least in the spring, summer, and fall, pretty regularly. And just kind of like just going and sort of meandering, hanging out. I'm thinking of venues. mean, there's the poetry project. There's Bowery Poetry Club, which hosts more like sort of like book style poetry, and also like slams, and sometimes there's slams at the LGBT Center in Manhattan. When I moved to New York, I didn't know anyone, and I just kind of went and like hung out and milled about and was annoying, and like eventually you know. But I think just like finding places where there are like poets gathering and doing things, whether those are online spaces or in-person spaces, and just putting yourself in as many of those as possible. And I think it can be maybe daunting and sort of difficult to find all of those spaces, but they are around. And I think maybe smaller bookstores in all the boroughs are really good places to start, except for Staten Island. So thank you, likewise. I know, sorry, Staten Island.
I was surprised to see the book categorized as like grief and loss and death, I think is what it was categorized as on, I think, this website. I don't know. It doesn't really seem like it's a book about death, but I think a lot of like trans existence is like embedded in grief and like loss and healing and all of that. So I just wondering if you could speak to that of like, is this a book of grief? Is this a book of healing? Is this like, how do you live in that tension?
I think for me, so my birthday is on Monday and I'm turning 41. And I think, thank you. Still alive. It's good. It gets better. Bad joke, sorry. Thank you. But I think in terms of the tension, I think that at this point of like just experiencing being alive, like the tension is kind of no longer there because so much grief, that's just omnipresent, and it's not even really its own category. I mean, there's densities of grief, but everything is kind of saturated in grief. And I don't feel that that's kind of a sort of depressing thought either. That's just the world that we presently live in, and that's why like dreams, poems are important. But it's my mother died during the pandemic at the very beginning of it, and so there's a poem about that, and there is like, yeah, I don't think it's a book about grief either. There's grief and loss in it, but like I wouldn't consider that to be a theme. And I was curious about that too. I saw it on the I was checking one day to see if I had any reviews on Amazon, and it was like the book was like number whatever 30 trillion in grief and loss, and I was like, wow, I was like, that's weird. It's weird that I'm charting in grief and loss, because I just didn't feel like that was it. But like in terms of like tropes of kinds of literature, like the trope of queer literature is that like, and especially the trope of like popular trans representation, is that all of our life is just, all of our lives are just endless horrible suffering and being misunderstood, and then we die, and then they make bad movies about us. They're bad, they're hard to watch. Who are they for?
They're not for us. Are they for us? Are they for you? No. More questions, please?
Hi, thanks for doing your reading. I was wondering what your writing practice looks like. Like, do you have a kind of like practice or discipline around it? Or are there things that make you feel particularly inspired to sit down and write or create?
Hi, thank you for being here. And I love that question because I love talking about like the the final thing is not so interesting. It's like all the, with any form of art, I feel like it's like the process that I always want to know about. And you dip in back into our capitalist vocabulary. I'm like really rigorous as fuck. Like here's the thing. The only thing that I'm good at doing on the earth is writing poems. It's like the only, like, I have a job and I have multiple jobs and like things that I do to get paid, but like I'm not particularly good at or invested in any of those things. And I resent them insofar as they take away from my ability to have rigor, you know? And which was a kind of, I don't want to say it was a blessing of the pandemic, but it was like, it's definitely not a blessing, but like it was nice to have a lot of time, I think. And something I realized about myself is that my optimal writing time would be from like 11 a.m. till like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And I can just like sit and stay with it all day long. And then sometimes I get really stoned at night and I like to, and I have like what I think are just like majestic ideas, you know. So I'll like reopen the document and just be like, oh, I always make sure I like make a copy because sometimes that way of editing really serves me, and a lot of times it does not. But I just like, I love doing it. I enjoy it. It can be hard to sustain focus with your phone and with everything, you know, with anything and everything. And this is like under optimal circumstances where you're not working a 9 to 5. And as far as like sort of inspiration, this answer is I'm gonna sound like a real jerk. I feel like it whenever I say this, but like as far as like writer's block or something like that, I never get it because like one of my favorite poets is this person named who passed this year named Bernadette Mayer. And I'm not so interested in poems that are and whatever Monday it is. You know, which I think that can like cause you to kind of stop. But I just sort of just draw everything from the materiality that I'm experiencing. And in that way, it's sort of constantly sustaining. And also like, if it's not working, I just don't fuck with it. You know, like if I sit down and like absolutely cannot do anything, I don't just stay there. And if there's long periods of time, if I notice that like for months, I'm not writing a lot, but I'm reading a lot and I'm like I'm engaged with community a lot. I am not hard on myself about that. Like that's a time of gathering. And I know that when I've gathered what I need to gather, it will tell me. So.
One more?
Do you have any new work with you that you would be willing to read, share?
I do, if we have time. Do we have time? Is that a short? You might regret this because it's all like very long form. Like I have a new manuscript and most of the poems are like 20 pages long, and but they deal with a lot of empty space. They're mostly empty space. It's not a poem. It's mostly just page. And I've been obsessed with concrete poetry, especially a writer from New York named N.H. Pritchard. There's a concrete poet and just a wonderful person to look at. I will read a shorter one. Basically, I'm confused about language and what it is, and that's what I'm kind of exploring in these poems. I forget what this one's called, but language is verb, an attribute of animal, something all things do. A gesture here, some chirping there, radar bat and discreet fin of whale, photo, syntho, leaf speak. Horse drop a tone, now raise it up, crying and crying in public, I'm crying, collective whimpers, sobbing, Alexandria's voluminous movement and communique beneath the sun. However we come and come together, it is in a language place. Words among many means of inciting directionality by exhaling sound and pointing at things. The basic unit is always breath, tether, tether, mother to the everything. Differentiation follows suit, outlines your daily somatic, sense perceptions, feelings, envies, attachments, flares and aches, breakouts, oh, the awful letting goes, morning pain and jealousies, loathe, lust, musk and fuck, sex and sexes, sexualities adjacent, this and that, all possible BPMs, but it's 4 on the floor, go bonkers, lick and stench, any subtle shift in arbitrary metrics of pressure. Novel feelings resonate, thus new ways to language emerge. Shock of water on a shaved head. Friends of York on blast needle, done. Plague stays, won't you come closer, it's been so long, it's been testing vans, hauntings, movie nights, play party reveries, greet sun, diner, hours talking, night 1 on hormones, spun loop G, up, quick up, month 9, year 1 stoned. Summer ends, the sun is setting, leaving no longer lovers in bits, wondering where on earth does tenderness go? It goes flip-flop, acquiesce to spirit nude. Lacking words, just go on feeling and wait. In the beginning there were words, and the words named God and set all things in relation, hence difference, hence translation. The word creates nothing but specifies its bearer, thus, really fucks with me how Krishnamurti asks, can you see the tree and not see the word? I mean, come on. This poem takes God as noun and re-speaks it as borderless compersion web. Don't laugh. It's here for the here always, the almost not quite yet, but on JK never was. Before and after, maybe. Hope has a language the spider weaves in what's kept, droplets, dead things, all this context and heavy bassline tone for inscription, parts of the body you're scared to. Recall that words are elastic. One dries, another shifts in the ocean, inhales what's new, spits it right back out. Lacking one language, you just go on feeling and let emotion make the words. Language doesn't fail to express the feeling. The feeling is its own language. Not everything is speech domain. Sometimes you shake your body night and day. Sometimes you draw a little picture or racket noise for play using just the tools you have. Here's the thing. Everything is always speaking. I slip into ocean and water surrounds me. My skin responds, my senses language and I hear, though it's not a sound. As I feel new feels, I speak new tongues, key to knowing but not the knowing itself. It's the body's relation to say shudder or subspace, O vowel ecstasy and a body shaking loose. Symbols, weird connections, formless thing hovering, come talk to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we have some time to mingle and chat, everybody. Imogen, thank you again so much for being here tonight. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. It's been really fun. I appreciate it. We appreciate all of you. So appreciate doing that.
Keep in mind, and don't kill me, we don't have 9 copies of this book, so it's gonna be a first come, first served thing. If you don't get a book today, we will make sure to order one for you downstairs. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love it. I love it.
Ay, no sé de palomitas. Capaz que
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Eso me pasa.
Yeah.
Yeah. Y no sé, me cuesta. I might.
So many things seem like really wonderfully.
Yeah, it's made by. But yeah. And he just throw it out.
Whatever that.
Well, thanks. Thank you for coming. Oh, wow. Hi. Thank you so much. I do. Please do.